Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar in collaboration with NYU Abu Dhabi. My name is Farida Lagami. I'm the General Manager of the Tharawat Family Business Forum. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you to our session today, which is held in the context of our Family Business Histories project. Today's session will take around 60 minutes, and we have the great pleasure to welcome a wonderful keynote speaker, whom I will introduce in a little while. Before we dive into the content of our session, I would like to invite you all to really participate in our session. We have participants from, I think, 16 countries on the call today. So feel free to chime in. If you have a question, please drop it in the Q&A field or send us a message. If you're experiencing any type of trouble with your connection or with the conference itself, feel free to contact our team members. And of course, you can adjust your Zoom view, but I think by now everybody is well versed with that. So before we start with the content of our session today, we would like, on behalf of Tharawat and NYU AD, very briefly to introduce the context of today's session, which is the Family Business Histories project. And to do that, I'd like to invite Martin Klimke, Professor Martin Klimke, to kind of start us off with a quick introduction about our collaboration and this project going forward. Martin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Farida, and welcome everyone to our webinar. And we're very happy to have such a distinguished guest with us today. Before we go to Dr. Andrea Schneider-Braunberger, let me just say a few words about the project that this webinar is embedded in and is a manifestation of. The project that we have been working on for several years is a collaborative project between New York University Abu Dhabi and Tharawat Family Business Forum. And we've come together to essentially retrace and compile, document, analyze the history and legacy of family businesses in the region with a specific eye to exploring their socioeconomic impact in the GC and Manasseh region overall. The reason for us to do that is because we feel that this is a topic that deserves much greater scholarly and as well as public attention due to the increased percentage, of family-owned businesses in the private sector, as you can see in this particular map here, and also the longevity, of some of these individual family businesses that we see all around the world, dating back at times centuries. And we're very interested, in our project to document, these various generations of individual family businesses, the foundational period and succession from one generation to the other, among other things. So we have four real strong pillars that we consider our goals. First of all, to understand the history of individual family businesses and conduct academic research, on the respective individual businesses and the economic structures that they're embedded in, to highlight the legacy, to think about, in a long-term trajectory of the impact of specific businesses on their surrounding societies. Thirdly, we're interested in preserving the heritage. So there's an archival collecting element, to the work that we do. We work together with the NYU Archives and Special Collection to digitize, family business histories, and also obviously to seek the dialogue, with contemporary practitioners and the business world as large to inspire the future by looking at the challenges of the past. And today's talk fits very nicely into that particular paradigm. Again, the reasons that we are, putting forward this project and have had, so much joy really, to work with all of you and, various academics across the world on this project is that we consider family businesses the pillar of Manasseh economies, that their sustainability is crucial to the region, especially in challenging moments like this. I think this is something that we always, want to reflect upon, that family business sustainability also requires vision and joint purpose, and that we see the historic context, the historical legacies and understanding as a wonderful opportunity also to create a shared identity, which is key for strategic vision for the future. So in general, I think we feel there's a lot a food for thought, a lot of opportunities to learn, by studying family businesses history. And last but not least, this is an initiative that actually came from the grassroots, from many of the members of Tharawat. So we're very happy to have engaged in that particular partnership. Now you see various manifestations, of our work in, for example, individual case studies. So if you go to our website, familybusinesshistories.org, you can download the case studies that we've published so far and had very engaging conversations with the respective family business members, about their case study. So this is a good deal of our work, but we're also equally keen to disseminate our knowledge and the research results through webinars like this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Martin, for that introduction. And now, of course, it's a great pleasure to invite our guest speaker, Andrea Schneider-Braunberger, who is the CEO of the Business History Society, or in Germany, and who is really one of the core academics and practitioners in this field of family business history, or business history in general. And Andrea's work, I just have to point it out, has also been a great inspiration to our project. And it's really a pleasure and an honor for us to welcome you here with us today, Andrea. Andrea is going to give us a short lecture, after which we will have the occasion to have an interactive conversation with her. So I'd like to invite our attendees to write down any notes, any questions you might have, so that Martin and I can afterwards integrate those into our conversation with Andrea. Andrea, welcome to the Family Business Histories project.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really an honor and pleasure to be with you today. So I will start sharing my screen. So I hope this is working. And,
yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. So yes, I'll start with a very short and brief introduction of myself and the GOG, the German Association for Business History, where I started 25 years ago as CEO after I finished my PhD at the university in Frankfurt-am-Main, Germany. The GOG itself was founded in the 70s, and its very special and unique position is that it was founded and is still run by business and academia at the same way. And what is the basic background for that was that it is that in Germany, the business history is not a real subject or department at universities. And so GOG is compensating for this fact and offering conferences, congresses, and all these kind of things for the researchers. On the other side, what GOG is doing is offering the firms being a partner if they want to do research on the history or if they want to create archives. This is a little bit like Tharawat is doing in their surrounding. When we are coming to our topic of the day to figure out how do family firms respond to crisis, I myself found the so-called era of times of extremes very helpful, because in those days we can see that there are a lot of crises within only a short time period. So it starts with World War I, it comes then to a revolution. In Germany we have the Spanish flu, which is nowadays very famous, and then we have in Germany hyperinflation, followed by the world economic crisis. Then in Germany, the dictatorship was implemented with the NSDAP, and last but not least, we have the Second World War. So why family firms? This is what just was said, that family firms, of course, have a high importance. Even also in Germany, it's the form of yes, the most, with 19%, very intense form for the economy. And the issue is here that in Germany we have about 25 large family firms, which are very well researched already. But when it comes down to smaller and medium-sized firms, there are continuous ongoing case studies in the late 1990s, but in comparison to the numbers of family firms we do have, we are still in the beginning of the research. When we look to the United States, Chandler said that the family firm is only the first step towards a big business. and I cannot go into the detail to this, if you look into the details of the institutional framework, you can see that legislation, capital market, and tradition are creating a very diverse and different framework for family firms here in Europe and especially in Germany. And this are very able to adapt, and they are highly flexible. And with this, resilience is the basis of their longevity. So I brought a set of family firms with me, which are coming from diverse branches and are set in diverse fields. Though the first is a very old bank in the north of Germany who is specialized in agricultural finance. The second one is Schminke, who is a producer, is a niche product producer of arts paints, which is a very international placed firm in Düsseldorf. The third is Borgers, who is the biggest firm also in a rural area, and it's specialized in industrial textiles and a supplier for the car industry. And the last one is Kurz, who stems out of an ironwork and who changed over the time to a machine building company. So when I showed you the crisis, I would today like to focus on three crises of the one, because the crisis coming with the First World War repeats in the second one, so I will concentrate on the second one. The crisis coming from the revolution and the end of the monarchy in Germany does not really affect the companies directly, in that case that it changed their governance or have deeper impact on them. And astonishingly enough, the Spanish flu is also nothing that in Germany really found its way into the archives. So basically we start with a hyperinflation, and we start with Johann Borgers, who came out from the First World War with a very productive way, and the inflation did not really have any impact on that. Of course, the daily life was, they had to struggle like all companies, but there was no consequence of the inflation. The Kurz company had a very positive effect, since they had high debts before the inflation came, and after hyperinflation, those debts were gone. So they came out from the inflation in a very strengthened way. The Seliger Bank was really hard hit by the inflation, because they lost almost no business at all. And last not least, Schminke, the artist paint manufacturer, had no impact at all. And this came because they were already in the end of the 19th century very highly internationalized, and they could sell their paints mostly to the Americas, and by that getting valuable currency, though inflation had no direct effect to them. When it comes to the world economic crisis, again, Johann Borgers was not hit at all. They just managed to do in a perfect way for that. Whereas Kurz, again, was positively hit because they had the opportunity to buy a bankrupt machine building company, and by doing so, they totally changed their business model and was very, very effective by doing so. Again, Seliger Bank was hit very intensely, because this time most of their clients went bankrupt, and with those bankruptcies, also the bank almost went bankrupt. It only could survive by selling the majority of their shares to a state bank that helped them to survive the next 10 years. But the costs was, of course, that they have to give up their status as 100% family firm. They lost their independency, and the state bank implemented high and intense regulations this was, of course, not very fortunate for the owners. Last not least, Schminke again was not really hit by the world economic crisis because their niche product was not directly affected. So let's turn to the political crisis when the Nazis took over in Germany and the dictatorship was implemented with the whole following setup of measures that were installed in Germany. I don't want to go into the details, but I think you can imagine that the strict regulation and limitation of raw material and so on and so forth was emerged with this in these years. So again, Johann Borgers was not long-lasting affected. They were positively affected because they could participate on the boom of the automotive sector in the 1930s, but there was no transformation to be seen in the firm. The Kurz company was also not in any case deeply affected by those political issues. Both firms were dealing with the state, especially when it comes to the war production, and but both were profit-oriented and not ideological in a close relation to the party. For Seliger, the thing is a little diverse. They changed a little bit their business model because the state bank that owned the majority of their shares wanted them to invest more in industrial clients and also widen their range to a nationwide setup. But this had no negative effect and also not a real transformation effect again. For Schminke, the political crisis was severe because Gerda Hesse, the woman she was also owner. She owned the company, and she together with her husband, she was Jewish, and of course she was persecuted later on in the 1930s and 40s. And the company only survived due to the fact that the quality of their product, Adolf Hitler's sympathy for arts, the long-lasting connections the company had to some decisive institutions helped them to overcome these years. To avoid that the firm fell into the hands of the Nazis, Greta Hesse stayed much longer than she should have stayed in Germany and risked her life. On the same time, to keep the production running under the conditions of the war, her son Ernst has to cooperate and produce for the army and also for Nazi artists. And on top, his well-connected wife supported him in the last years when he also was prosecuted because he was so-called half Jewish. The firm survived in the end, but it lost licenses and it turned into a huge family crisis about what had happened in those last days of these times. Interesting enough is that the relationship between the owners and the politics causes family conflicts later on. And the question, did business have to cooperate with the Nazis, was and is lasting. Borgers, for example, made profits during the war and produced not to save their own workplaces, but they produced by using forced labor. Seliger's younger brother Gustav was a convinced Nazi, but this fact did not have any impact on the business success of the bank. And Julius Hesse, the owner of Schminke, his mother and his son was prosecuted, but they both stayed in close contact with people that were close to the power. In the war economy, business, of course, had to cooperate and produce with the system. But in the end, it played a minor role if the business people were close to politicians, especially in this case to the Nazis. But, and I added here, as you can see, a new form of crisis. This is a crisis that is caused by the family firm, the owner family. We can see that the firms adapted where it was needed, and they changed their business models or the governance structure when it was needed. But more often we find crises that are caused by members of the family. At Borgers, it was a conflict about the business model when in 1929, so in between the inflation and the world economic crisis, the firm transformed into a public shareholding company to gain fresh money for the expansion, which were needed to adapt to the production line of the car industry. The young brother, Gustav Seliger, caused, with his debts created by his lifestyle, that the bank loses the independence. And last not least, as niche producer, Schminke was able to adapt to the governance within the critical time, but that caused severe family conflicts after World War II. To conclude here, Seliger and Borgers took in investors to secure their existence and finance their strategic goals. By doing so, they followed a special logic. To ensure the long-term existence, they accepted for a short term to give up their status as 100% family firms. But their strong will for self-determined action was decisive for the quick return in family structures. And in both cases, this decision was not profit maximizing, but risk maximizing. When Seliger turned back in 1940 to become a family firm by mobilizing family and friends to buy out the state bank, they dared the loss of profit. When Borgers invested in 1929, it meant high risk for them. And in all those cases, trust of the owner family was backing them. The same is true for Kurz when they repeatedly changed the business model, not knowing if the new model is really going to succeed. So no matter what and how those family firms adapted, what we can see is that one of the decisive moments is the long-term orientation. That means the firms decided on purpose to adapt and change for a short term to survive in the long run. Of course, there are on top crises that brings a firm to its end by removing the capital or by removing markets and sales opportunities. On the other hand, we can see that firms survived the same crises by being highly flexible in various dimensions. But it is rarely a cut and more a transformation. And long-lasting transformations of governance, we usually can see when the intense growth of a firm, a family firm, and the accompanying need with this growth for more capital cannot be longer raised by the family alone, or when they are lacking successors. So what happens in the pandemic to these four firms? Do they react differently with their historical experience? And did they develop the Kurz company? They had experienced that adapting their business model over the decades is an effective way to secure the future. So already after the crisis in 2009 and the lesson they learned, they felt well prepared for the pandemic. Kurz quickly installed new routines, double-checked all requirements, and started an austerity program. But Kurz did not decide one time and let it go, but consequently challenged their decisions and adjusted wherever needed. Their total action is based on flexibility and the trust and experience and longevity of the firm. Borgers already faced a crisis before the pandemic because they were hit by the crisis in the German car production sector. And being familiar with a series of crises, the owner family has the strong will and the courage to decide even then. Already in 2009, the firm was most likely to fail, but they survived. The owners are convinced nowadays that they gained over the decades enough experience in crisis management and the trust in themselves to survive. Seliger did face even more changes after the Second World War. In the 60s, again, they took in a bigger bank as partner, which took the majority in the 1990s. And when this big bank in the 2000s started to fully integrate this small private bank, again, some family and friends mobilized themselves to buy out the shares again, and they brought the small private bank back to their roots with a very very special offer of banking in this region. And by doing so, they also survived the 2009 crisis very well, and they are looking forward to also being in close contact with their clients, face the actual pandemic in a strong way. And Schminke is one of the so-called winners of this pandemic, because the people in lockdown, they are looking for new hobbies, or they dig out old hobbies. So they are buying art paints. And for Schminke, the pandemic can be seen as real booster. But nonetheless, the future crisis is inevitable. The three siblings of the owner family do not have any child. So the family firm will end now with the 5th generation. But since this problem is visible, the family is already preparing a governance transformation and to create a foundation to keep the independence of the firm for the future. So again, what we can see is that the external crisis does not hit all businesses in the same way and will have diverse effects. So let's turn to my last question. So why should a family firm care about its own history? History, it's not about anecdotes. If it's done professionally, history can answer questions. It might help gaining some guide rails for today's decision. So history can offer orientation. And for what kind of purposes history can be used, and there are some very obvious measures you can see here in the red bubbles that you can do, of course, marketing and things like that. But I think it's much more interesting, which when it comes to the blue bubbles, where you can see what you can learn from the history. And this is what you can learn in respect to trust, in the fact what kind of factors help you to gain resilience, what is the purpose of a firm, or the just mentioned orientation. And history also may help the owner family by offering role models for the succession, for the successors, for the succeeders, and role models for processes. And also it may help to overcome latent crises. In Germany, especially, you can see that there are lots of crises within the owner families. The crisis or the conflict, it's not crisis, it's more conflicts, are between the generations or in the generations. And they often can be seen, especially when it comes to the evaluation on behavior in critical times. So a neutral research, a so-called neutral research history might help opening their eyes of the conflict partners and laying ground for a communication about what really happened. And this might start to overcome a conflict. So I would like to conclude here and come back to the beginning. So future needs the past, which is the mission of our association. Translate much more precisely if you say it's not the past, but it's the origin. And here we close, so to speak, the circle that the origin, tradition, patterns, and path. This is what history should look at to gain fruitful insights for the firm and to reveal factors of resilience. By knowing these factors, firms hopefully are enabled in this famous VUCA world, so this world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambivalence, to decide. Of course, you can never repeat history, but knowing where you come from, gaining trust in your competence, and using learned patterns may help in reaching a decision. And this is what in a VUCA world, where you really need decisions and flexibility, is needed. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. This was truly Wonderful, and what a journey through history and through space in a way at the same time. So thank you so much for that introduction. So of course, I'd like to reiterate to our audience to feel free to ask questions. Both Martin as well as Andrea will be happy to answer any questions you might have. So to kick off our conversation, Andrea, there is this perception that German family firms have a very good reputation abroad, internationally, right? They are considered to be extremely stable, highly efficient, highly professionalized, and if we look at what they went through within 1 century, it's quite a substantial amount of crises in 100 years. So, what do you think makes German firms? What makes that capacity to come out of this with strength? And you hinted at a couple of those elements, but just to reiterate, perhaps, how did German firms come out of these multiple crises in the last century with a lot of strength? And my second question would be, what's the role of the governments in kind of strengthening family firms in Germany?
Okay, to answer the last one, because I think it's more easy. It's of course the governments are setting the framework. This is no question, and by doing so, of course, they can foster the family firms. Okay, now it was frozen. I hope it's up again.
Yeah,
so if you look at the discussion between the United States and Europe, you can intensely see that the legal framework, for example, is absolutely fostering, especially in Germany, because of these taxation of family firms, which help them to hand over in Germany, to hand them over to the next generation. And of course, this kind of framework is important by the government. And what you can also see is that we have over the time, when you like to let's say last 50 years, a change in the reputation of family firms. Because if you look almost only 25 years ago, the reputation was that family firms are traditional, and this was traditional is the same as old-fashioned. And it only came out that when the society realized that within the globalization of the world, that especially family firms, and of course in Germany we have lots of these hidden champions with their niche markets, that they are the absolute success stories, and that is not a one story, but there are hundreds of these success stories. So this changed the reputation totally. So and by doing so, of course, we have the positive consequence of good reputations.
Sure.
And government, I think, can set, again, it's a framework that this reputation can grow over the time. And then it comes in with institutions that you can see, for example, in Germany, that you have specialized universities we have two dealing with topics of family firms and their challenges and so on and so forth. So then it's a lot of consequence for that. And the first part of your question is more complex, because, to be honest, most of the family firms or firms in total are failing. When we look at the long lasting companies, there are still, of course, there are a couple and hundreds of them, but they are still not the majority. The majority is gone. So, and therefore I think, but it's so interesting. So why are those who are still here? What are their success factors?
Exactly.
And for me, of course, it's a long list. Maybe you can. There's lots of literature, and the 25 or 30 different factors you can find over the time. But I think basically, really, I'm very, very convinced that my cases, and I have some more that I presented here, you can always nail it down. In the end, it's the long-term orientation. It's that they are not that they're not looking for the next 3 months or even 2 years, but they're looking to the next generation. This is a very clear setup, and this is the exact combination is this flexibility. Because they are owners, they have the power to make decisions without asking too many people. So they are highly flexible, and usually they have the courage to do so. So they are willing to decide, which is really a very important point. And the last very decisive point for me is the trust. this point of trust that is in the middle, in a connection between the trust of the owner family, the trust of the employees, the trust of the clients, this trust that is based on experience, on this experience that this firm is long lasting and it will last forever. Of course, it's not necessarily so, but it is based inside this trust. Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on this, and I think I'm tempted to ask my own question, but here, let's go to the audience. So there is a question in the chat that asks, do you think that family businesses are better at using their history for strategic decision-making than corporations, even when those corporations also have a long history? And that's question number one. Question number two, in Germany, you have histories that implicate family business histories and corporations in criminal activities, especially, in the era of National Socialism. How do you see family businesses in particular dealing with these particular challenges of documenting history that is difficult for them to come to terms with, both on a personal level as well as on an economic or potential public relations level? Okay.
So first, for the uses, it depends. When you point out uses in the way I would prefer it, so lessons to learn. Yeah, it's I think it's starting only in the family firms action, because in the big industries in Germany, we have a long tradition that they created archives even in the beginning of the 20th century, and they started to research and to use their history for diverse things. The family firms, of course, used the history in this context, what you call the uses of the past idea, by anecdotes. Yeah, but this is. So they implemented anecdotes, but this is very dangerous to my understanding. The second point, I think, but to stay shortly with the first question, is if you look at the family firm, they have it more easy to use the history because they are closer linked to their employers and clients, so it's more likely to get them into the boat, and then in a big firm, of course, yeah, you have to reach out for the people as well. So this is the advantage, I think, the real advantage they do have. And when it comes to these problematic timing of the National Socialism and the documentary and how to deal with that, basically, my experience is that many people up to the 1990s, 20,000, they understood it would be good to get rid of all files of that day. But our research had proven that the point is, especially in a dictatorship, the official state documentary is so good because everything is regulated up to the very smallest detail. And these files are in public archives. So in the end, it's like that if companies do not have their own files of these critical days, the interpretation of the history is only based on the outside perspective. And this can be really problematic, yeah. And it's way better to keep your own files, to look at it, to really make the interpretation. And the second is how to deal with the thing. We have the experience, and this is really what came to me over my during my studies with family. Enkelgeneration, the grandchildren generation, and you can see.
I think we're having some connection issues. Let's see if she's coming back. Otherwise, Martin, until she comes back, perhaps we can talk a little bit about what we've experienced in the project as well, with regards to documenting family business histories in the region, because of course in our region it's a very new field, so there has not been a lot of work done in documenting history. Partially also because it's kind of a bit similar. There are some histories that people are not comfortable with documenting or are difficult to document. And I believe that it might be interesting to perhaps draw a parallel here to what we have been doing in our project, and see what we've experienced, specifically with regards to families in areas where archives have been destroyed through wars, for example, or we have a couple of case studies in our sample where we literally have an 80-year family business with this much documentation. And we were the first ones to ask them, do you have a documentation of your 80 years? Because the family archive was destroyed in a war, they have this much documentation left. So I'm wondering if you also, maybe from a historian perspective, want to comment on this point.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think what Dr. Andrea said is very true. I mean, there's a certain level of record keeping that is legally required, obviously, to operate the business and, you know, for tax and other purposes, and that differs, you know, from country to country. But I think one of the things that we've experienced is that obviously a lot of family business keep extensive records, but there's one way of sort of, you know, keeping the records, you know, for your own purpose and then for a larger preservation perspective. So I think it's key sort of to have the know-how to document your own history in professional ways. And I think, you know, we've been trying to, in this project, and also what, you know, the institution that Andrea is representing is doing, is to professionalize and essentially help guide family businesses how to document the histories in a professional way that preserves that particular knowledge and the documentation for generations to come.
Well, we're happy to have you back, Andrea.
Sorry, no idea what happened. I was just kicked out. It said, you're locked out.
The German internet is against us. So did you want to pick up on the point that you were going to make?
Yeah, what I was making, I was just wanted to point out that I think it's really important to face the history, even if it's problematic, because if you don't do, you keep on latent conflicts, which are there in these diverse interpretation over really generations. I mean, I can give you one example that really, I was really shocked that a daughter of a family owner, he was a Nazi, he was also an ideological Nazi and so on and so forth. And she lived up to 5 years ago with the notion that he's innocent. He did not do nothing, because when he was, after the war, he was imprisoned, and after 2 years he came home and said, yes, hello, I'm free. And the whole family said, oh, cool, he's free. So he was set free. So of course he couldn't have done nothing, because otherwise he would not have set free. But when we digged into the history, what came out was he was not set free by a court trial, but he was free to an amnesty. I don't know the English word.
Like through an amnesty program.
Yeah, to an amnesty program. And so of course his case was not revealed, so it was something totally different. And the problem was that the daughter, because the society was always, yes, claiming against them, and she felt for decades she had this feeling it was so unfair. The life was unfair to her because her father was innocent and the whole people around her were against that. And if they would have digged into it 50 years ago, she would have been a total different woman. And I think this is very, of course, extreme, but it shows how what impact these stories can be if you don't look at them.
Well, let me pick on that, because I think one of the challenges of family business history, as opposed to kind of general corporate history, is that it's a family history as well as a company's history, right? So you have that extremely personal experience that is intermixed with documenting what business decisions have happened, how the transformation has happened. And there is one question that I'd like to weave into my next point with regards to how do you document, for example, or what would you recommend a family that knows that there have been conflicts in their past within the family? And you nicely showed that, of course, we have all these outside influences, but family firms transform also because of their internal conflicts. So we do usually focus on kind of history with regards to how we react to certain external influences, but what can we do with regards to internal conflicts? Because as you say, they do have very long repercussions. I mean, we see it in the region all the time. Sometimes there are families that are imprisoned by a conflict that happened between two brothers 50 years ago or 70 years ago, and it still has its effects today. And it, in a way, why I'm saying this and why I think it's important is because it limits our capacity to take business decisions today. And so how can history perhaps, or documenting history, perhaps play a role in mitigating this?
Yeah, I think to the documentation is very important, that you try to keep on the files that make clear why decisions are taken. So it's, and this is, I mean, this is a really good situation we have in Germany due to this, the history of how the firms are dealing with history here in Germany. We have this benchmark that you have files and you are open, and that historians are allowed to really see very core files and critical files of firms. This also is a portion of trust. Yeah, because our association, companies trust in us, and you have to build trust, especially with family firms, because it's, you look into the very inner side of these firms and these families. Yeah, and but if you're doing so, you have the really the chance to really reveal what are the strategic thoughts behind the decisions, or where did the persons feel forced to do something like that. And I want to give one last example, not an example, but a basic thing, what happened between this Nazi period and after, because we usually the conflict is linked to these persons who started their careers in this Nazi period and were very successful after. And when then this person had in the Nazi period a sort of a morally questionable acting, and but then in the Federal Republic was absolutely, you know, they gained, they paved the floor for the huge success of a firm. Yeah, so you have it's this person is it's not easy to say he's a good guy or a bad guy, and with this ambiguousness, the families sometimes have these tendencies that this conflict is really deepen, and then it starts that the sister siblings, the tribes are fighting to each other, and so on and so forth, and it can be really a very dangerous situation can come out of this, and it cannot be solved unless you really find out or accept that people are and can be in that way, and you have to accept it for them. Yeah,
I agree. And I think, you know, the reason why we also started this project, and I'm sure also why many family firms work with you, is because, you know, we need to understand how we can be the most effective and efficient in today's world, and we are only adding complexity. It's not becoming easier. Our crises are becoming more complex. You know, the situation with our stakeholders is becoming more complex. So as a firm, we need to have as many tools in our arsenal as we can, and I think we should not shy away from trying to you know, work on our legacy and understand our legacy. Martin, maybe a final question from your side.
So I think one of the things that I feel is important also to bring up is how do you feel history has helped in addressing the current crisis with regard to the pandemic, and how have the specific family firms precisely engaged with history in an open way to essentially win over the trust, but also position themselves right now. I think one of the key things that we're seeing is obviously the question of global supply chains and the sort of idea of a more localized economic infrastructure. So how, in your perception, has that played a role, you know, for family business in playing that particular card in their respective sectors?
Yeah, I think that's yeah, it depends on the potentially on the sectors, yeah, because I don't think that it's really only family firm related, your question. It's but what you can see is, and we did a little research last year on that, because we exactly wanted to understand, do history really matter more in those days of uncertainty? Yeah, so we made an analysis of a couple of daily papers, and what we can find is really a significant growth of numbers of articles which are related to history, and also all experts were relating to history and historical experience. And of course, what you can see is, and this is also what my samples show you, that the firms know and they remember the last crisis, which is 2009, the financial crisis. So they immediately go back to that because this is in their, it's there. But the big advantage of the older family firms but this is slash or other firms, is that they can also have the internalized longer lasting experience that dates back to crisis that the person who is ruling today or who's managing today has not a personal experience. But if he knows that, like Kurz is a very, very, very good example, because they really consequently over the last 100 years, they changed their business model, by certain ways, and always on purpose. And always they did not know if this will work out, but they still did it. And they have repeated this pattern so often that they really just have this, okay, we have to adapt or we just do it. And I think this is really a huge advantage in comparison to a classical non-family firm, because they have to ask, if I look at a shareholding company, the board cannot change the business model within a day. They have to ask their supervisory board and the shareholders and so on and so forth. So you have to have you need to have longer processes until you can really change things. And also when it comes to the globalization, of course, I think that some family firms might now start maybe to reintegrate, but what I can see so far from my case is they don't do that. They widen their umbrella of trust in the cooperation also to their new international partners, because it's their role out to the world, if I may say so. It's not that they, it's not that they are going somewhere buying something, but they are integrating those partners. Borges is a very good example. When they did a history of the firm a couple of years ago, the main purpose was to integrate their employees in the world, to give them the possibility to understand what is the driver at the home company. And I think this was a very, very good idea, because thus you can see what's happening. They try to integrate the people into the family, into the big family. And this is, and then in crisis, you don't just cut this off because you have a close relationship again.
Well, I think, thank you so much, Andrea. And unfortunately, we're already almost running out of time. Time always flies when it's interesting, sadly. But I wanted to kind of perhaps close with a final little question, and then ask you maybe for a couple of takeaways. We have quite a few family businesses on our call here today. Perhaps a couple of takeaways that you would give them going forward with regards to their history. But before we do that, when we look at the success factors that you mentioned, like, you said long-term orientation, high flexibility. In our region, I think certainly they are similar, and they're probably the same to a large extent. But I think what you mentioned the last here is the stakeholder engagement. So to really organically build that trust in the community, because what we have seen is that very often that goodwill is just that little push that manages you through a crisis, or that carries you through a crisis, right? Sometimes you can take all the best corporate decisions you want, but if the market doesn't respond to your actions, then you might as well not have taken any decisions. Or even, for example, that company that shifted its business model, I'm sure part of the success of all these different business models is because they have consistently worked with their stakeholders. Is this something that you see across the board, or do you think this is just more in certain industries or in certain geographies the case?
No, I'm absolutely with you. This close linkage to all stakeholders, and this is of course, this is the owner family, this is clients, this is employers, this is the community. Usually you can see it that those family firms are highly engaged in the community as well, because they are so important. And by doing all these kind of things over the decades, and this is for the long-lasting family firms. What you can see is that when you come to employees, you can see that there are generations of families working for the same firm, for example, yeah. Or you can see that they, for generations, they are supporting, I don't know, sports activities in the community or things like that, or of course, maybe sometimes even very more important things, yeah. So this is a growing thing, a long-lasting connection, which is not only based on one single person, but on the whole owner family. And so there's again, then this story with the trust developing out of that. And I think this is really what you can see in some of these cases, is because those kind of things are always mutual. You have, sometimes it's like for Kurz, when they had this crisis in 2009, one of the owners, he left the board of management to save the money, his salary. So in that case, they could keep more workforce. And later, and of course, the employees were very thankful for this, and then they accepted that they have to lower, I think they were working a little less hours a week or something like that. So, you know, this mutuality is this typical kind of things that is going on there. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So sadly, we have to start closing our session. So Martin and I thought it would be fantastic, now that we have you on this call, to ask you for, you know, a couple of takeaways or points to consider, learning points from, I mean, this is very difficult from all your experience, but what would you like to share with us as a closing comment?
Yes, I think for me personally, I can only encourage any family firm and family, the owner family, to really, yes, make a little effort at least, yeah, to dig into their own history, because it's whatever I did see when we did this, or when we are doing this, is we're starting from a very low level of knowledge, so to speak. Of course, there are some anecdotes, there are little knowledge here, little knowledge there, but in the end, it's only punctual, and it's not really that you can really understand the whole development and what really happened at certain important points of the history. So you should not be afraid looking at that, even if it might sometimes hurt, because in the end, my experience is that all these family firms were absolutely happy. Yeah, that some of them, you know, we had this that one brother was yes, keen on knowing more about the history, and the other was like, oh no, I don't want them. And then over the time, he would get more and more curious, and in the end, this one who was not so much behind it was, yes, suddenly flying for the idea. And so in the end, you find out we reveal usually many unknown things, and with these unknown things, it often happens that families by themselves realize sometimes patterns that are there, but that are not seen unless you really, you know, look into this mirror. And therefore, it's, even if you might be afraid that there is something you will not absolutely like, there are much more points you will like in your history. And I think you can really work on them and really take them to have a more optimistic view in the future. Right. And therefore, I'm really convinced for that.
Well, thank you so much. And I think one thing that we also always mention when we speak to families with our project is that you don't have to publish anything if you don't want to. You know, it is also something, it's a tool. It should be a tool for the owning family on the inside to know their history and to communicate that history to the successors. Because I think as a successor, sometimes you feel that the legacy is a heavy bag of stones that you're carrying around. But a friend of mine once said, but I never dare to look inside the bag because I know I have to carry it around, but I don't know what's inside, right? And I think in order to be effective in the future and to be future-oriented leaders, it is important to understand what type of legacy we are carrying and how we want to go forward. So before we close, I'd like to point out that our project, of course, is going forward. We have a couple of upcoming case studies that we hopefully will be able to publish in the coming weeks, one from the UAE and one from Algeria, which also shows that we are trying to be extremely geographically diverse in our case study. And we really invite everybody to visit our website, join our project. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us at any time. If you have ideas, suggestions for our project, we are really trying to build a momentum to talk about family business history, but also taking into consideration the very complex context that we are all in today, and of course the future, which it should inform and inspire. So Andrea, thank you so much. I'd like to really, on behalf of also, I'm sure Martin, I see him nodding, I can speak on behalf of him, to thank you for joining us, also for being so supportive of our project and you know, inspiring our work. And I'd like to also thank our audience. It was fantastic to have you all with us. Thank you. I apologize, we weren't able to address all the questions, but we hope that we kind of summarized some of these areas of interest that you had. And Andrea, we're hoping to welcome you back very soon to Family Business Histories.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.